So, when you first open SPSS, this is what you will see. And you have multiple options. You can open an existing data source, and this would mean that it's a data source that is specifically an SPSS file. And just like you would see .doc, .docx, .pdf, .xls in terms of the prefix of document files, .sav is the file name or the file type when it comes to SPSS files, data sets specifically. You can also open up another type of file like an Excel file in SPSS. You can also import it, so this would be another way of opening data in SPSS. Or you can start with a brand new blank slate and type in your data, type in your variables, type in the data for all of your variables, and that's what we're going to do this week for your in-class exercises. So here are your three multiple options in terms of what to do and how to get the data. Once you've selected your option, you want to click on OK. So, next thing you'll see, it's going to really depend. You may end up seeing something in data view or seeing something in what's called variable view. And you can look at the bottom left-hand corner of the SPSS window to determine which view you're in. And really, the data view is pretty much like an Excel database. This is where you're going to find the data for all your participants and for all of your variables. And each participant will be a row, and each variable will take up a column. So your rows are the horizontal, and your variables are going to be the vertical. When you're in variable view, this is where you're going to see details about each of your variables. And you're going to see that you can have all sorts of information and details about your variables. So here's just a really nice snapshot of the data view. Looks pretty similar to an Excel file. Down here we can see that we are in data view. It's highlighted in yellow. And like I mentioned, each row is going to represent each person. And we can see in the first column, and the second column are variables. So the columns indicate the variables. We see our first column is ID number. Second column is gender. I also want to bring attention to this specific icon here. This is a nice little toggle between values and your labels. And we'll talk about this when we talk about coding. So notice for gender, we have males and females. Well, if we clicked on this button, toggling between A and 1, we'll see that male and female will turn into 1 or 2 or 0 or 1, depending upon how we code them. When you're in variable view, this is something that's unique to SPSS. You will not find this view in Excel. And you'll have different features, and the ones that I want to point out to you and that really you're going to want to focus on and really will be working with for the rest of the semester is the name. And this is the short name for a variable. This is something that you want to have a nice, short, concise heading or tag or name for each of your variables. And this is what you're going to see when you're in data view at the top of your data set. This is going to be the column headings for each of your variables. So it's going to be something short and sweet, but something you want to be able to identify what that variable is. And so SPSS does not allow any spaces in your variable names. So sometimes you may want to use a dot or a subscript if you want to separate terms. But remember, this is going to be just a short name for each of your variables. The label is where you're going to have a nice long descriptor for it. A lot of people use the entire question from a questionnaire to put in the label, or just something a much shorter version of the questionnaire, but much longer to describe more in detail of what the variable is. So this is what SPSS shows you on the output at the top of your tables. It gives you what the variable label is. Values is where you can enter what the different numbers for your answers mean. And really this is when we talk about coding. We have nominal variables because we're using categories and groups, males, females, undergraduates, graduates, married, single, divorced. Because these are words, and SPSS, when it does analysis, likes to work with numbers, we have to code each of our possible responses and give it a number. So just like nominal variables, we do the same for ordinal variables. Strongly agree to strongly disagree. Name it from traditionally we usually do 1 as the highest, so strongly agree, or strongly disagree with 5. It's up to you as the researcher how you want to code them. And we also want to do coding, and we want to insert values for grouped interval ratio variables. So thinking about when we have age groups, 18 to 25, 26 to 30, 31 to 35. Because our responses are not actual age numbers in terms of years, but rather the groups, we have to code each of those groups a number and assign them a number. So for example, again, males and females 1 and 2. So let's take a look at a snapshot of what the variable view looks like. You see, each row this time gives details about one specific variable. In the data view, each row represented one participant or one case. When you're in variable view, each row details about one specific variable. And then the columns are going to give you the different details of each of those variables. So the first one is the name. This is again the short, brief name that you're going to give each variable. SPSS will not allow any spaces, so you may want to use dot. Here's your label. So this is just going to be a longer descriptor of that. So we see that for our first variable, the variable name was ID. But what ID really means, and we can put this in the variable label column, that this is the participant identification. We see for our IV variable, our second variable, this is the condition. And we see under values, the condition is going to be 1 is coded for control, and 2 is coded for whatever the treatment is. So this is when we're using nominal variables and we're using coding for nominal, ordinal, or grouped interval ratio. We also have a missing column, and this is where if we have any missing data, we want to make sure that we put in our data view some notation or something that says, okay, this person didn't fill out the specific variable. So we want to code, and traditionally we put 999, because really if we're used talking about gender or talking about age or some other coding, you're not going to have anything that's 999. So if for whatever reason your variable has possible ranges from 0 to 1000, and 999 can be possibly one of the answers or responses to your variable, then you may use 99999 or something else. Really something that's going to be outside of your normal ranges of possible answers or possible responses or codes, that this will allow you to say, okay, this isn't a mistake, but we know this is missing data. We're going to put in here, anytime we have 999, that answer or that variable will be included in the missing part of our frequency tables. And the last piece of information that we want to make sure we learn about in variable view is measure. And this is where we describe and we assign the level of measurement for each of our variables. And so we have the options of nominal, ordinal, and scale. And scale is a combination of the interval and ratio. So this is where you may have seen me in the previous weeks start putting interval and ratio together. This is when we can put them together because SPSS looks at it as just a scalar quantitative variable. If I ask you a question somewhere else and ask you a level of measurement, I expect you to say, okay, is this interval or is this ratio? But when it comes to using it and reporting it in SPSS, we assign it as scale.